Well, it's spring 2020, for better or worse. I thought I would give a quick little update here to this trial winner configuration that I posted this kind of haphazard article back in the fall. November, I guess it was, November 14th, on a new wintering setup that I was trying for this year. And again, being spring now, I've had a chance to go through, I've assessed all my hives, and I've had really positive observations compared to other years. Not so much in terms of survivability. I guess this year is the first year that I haven't lost a hive this winter. I did go through second round of feeding just the other day, and I do think that there's one hive that's it's missing a queen. There was quite a bit of a roar there, but it was a bit cool, so I just marked that colony, and I'll check it a little bit later on at a warmer day. Drop a frame of young larvae in it, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, like my hives look really good this spring, really good. Now historically, like I've done well, in terms of average loss rate. Like 15% was, that would be on the high side for losses for me. But the problem for me always was that, I always wanted to have big busting at the seams boxes of bees early. Like open them up and then, throw a patty on them and just watch them take off, because they're already, a nice big cluster of bees in the box. Some of them would be that way, but the variability is what I was trying to take out. Is get rid of those dinks, basically, right? The 1, 2, 3 framers, they can come around, but you've got to, they take a lot of maintenance in the spring, and they're not, there could be a lot more productivity in our apiaries if we had more consistency across those, those nice boxes of bees. So I think it's a pretty common aspiration in the beekeeping community to chase that. And so I look for all kinds of little tips and tricks anywhere I can find them. So anybody who knows me or knows my beekeeping style, nutrition and disease management is right up there for me. And the success that I've had to date is pretty much exclusively because I've been able to manage that fairly well, that side of beekeeping. Because in terms of the practical side of beekeeping, I'm still fumbling through it like anybody else. So I've often found that the best little tidbits that I'll get are when I can get a moment in time to speak to a beekeeper that's been doing it for a lot of years. Like the 40, 50-year guys that are still doing it tend to have the little golden nuggets that that I want to glean from. And that brings me to a conversation of where I kind of got the idea to set up the way that I'm set up here this winter, and I'll walk through the setup so there's no mystery on what I was doing. But I want to give credit where credit's due, and I've already spoke to Rick, and he's given me permission to mention him by name. But please do me a favor and don't light his Facebook page up with questions. If you scroll through Rick's the history of his post, everything, he's explained it out to a lot of people in a lot of different ways, because he does get a lot of questions, because what he does out in Alberta with his bees is quite impressive. And it really caught my attention, and I reached out to Rick, and he gave me some pointers. Basically, it was around the whole discussion on top entrance. So historically for me, like I was never a hive insulator, and wintering outdoors just like this, that I paint them black, solar thermal gain in the spring, gets them up and running, they get their cleansing flights, and I wintered very well, like with very 5, 10, 15% every winter. But again, it was the fact that I think that I had healthy bees, that they were able to go through without any insulation. But just a couple small tweaks based on Rick's advice. And again, I haven't duplicated this. It certainly could be a fluke. But if you look and see what he's doing with his hives, I think that there's some sound pointers here. So Rick Williams out in Alberta, basically what he does is he has these very large, and there's a lot more that goes into what Rick does than just his wintering strategy and how he insulates his hives. There's a lot more to it than that. He's been breeding his own queens for a long time. He has really good stock there, and he knows how to feed. He knows when to feed. He's got a whole system, a program dialed in. However, what he does for his winter management is quite noteworthy, and it goes against a lot of conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom that I think a lot of us, especially here on the East Coast, where we tend to be a little more humid in the wintertime than they do in the prairies, we accept that upper entrance as if it's almost axiomatic, as if it's almost guaranteed that you need that. And that school of thought was ingrained into me very early in my beekeeping career, I'll call it. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker, and I chased, bigger colonies, trying to get bigger colonies through winter, and it was just like, it didn't matter what I tried to do, how low my mite loads were, how well fed they were. I've sent, in this whole nutrition program that I'm trying to dial in here, I've sent countless bee samples off to labs, and I know my viral loads are low. I know, brood diseases are non-existent in my apiary, and I know that because I send samples to the lab all the time to check for that. So I've eliminated those variables. It's not, you can have healthy bees and they'll winter well, but there's certain things that'll take a toll on them over the winter. So without dovetailing too much and getting myself down a bunch of different rabbit holes here, basically what Rick does, and you can go on to his page, but again, please don't, everybody pester the guy here. Just read through his posts, and you can kind of get the gist of what he's doing there. But he sets these very large insulated, highly insulated hoods that he makes up down over his hives. No upper entrance. He just leaves the bottom entrance opened up in his hives. And what I find, interesting about that, if you follow any of the work of Dr. Tom Seeley, what they've done is Tom and his colleagues went out over a number of years, and they cut down a lot of bee trees that they could find, as many as they could find. And they took all kinds of measurements, and they put the average representation of what the average beehive dimensions look like here. So the average of all of those samples that they took. And this is what they typically look like. So if you can see here, like our boxes of 1 inch are dramatically under insulated on the sides for sure by, at least in our R3 or less. But it's this upper R value that we're really not achieving at all in a modern Langstroth box. Or at least I wasn't achieving it with my current winter setup, so, a lot of people, maybe already understand this and get it, and that's great. But I didn't, and I do now, is that when you insulate heavily, at least on the top side of your box, and you remove that upper entrance and put it down to the bottom, this is what they're selecting in the wild. So I have to assume that there's some wisdom over the eons that they've been selecting themselves. This is what they currently select. So I have to assume that there's some wisdom in nature. There typically is. And this is what they're going for. And this is basically what Rick has set up. And this is what he advised me to do, was to dump my upper entrance. Just get rid of it and then hyper insulate the top of my hives. So I ran the whole winter on 116 hives with basically nothing for side insulation. This is what I was typically using for side insulation. Some of them, like this yard here, I think half of this yard when I was done, they weren't even wrapped on the sides. It was just basically R10. And then what else did I have here? So the Reflectix Insulation that I use as an inner cover, I got the idea to use that as an inner cover from Ian Stepler. I think he kind of popularized that. There's a few guys around here using it before I seen it from Ian, but he's the guy who got me onto that. It's a great inner cover. But I have a layer of that Reflectix here. I have a layer of R10 foam, and then under my lid I have another layer of that Reflectix. So depending on whose numbers you look at for that Reflectix insulation, it can be anywhere from R1 to R6. So, worst case scenario, there's an R12 insulated lid on these hives for the winter. These ones here, this yard, there's 6 more that are just kind of up here in this yard. These are all just literally, man, I've got almost 3 boxes of bees in these things right now. Like they're coming down into the third box, just starting to use space into that third bottom box right now. It's really quite an eye-opening change in cluster size in the spring for me. But that's it. There's no upper entrance. I taped the seams up. Again, a bunch of old rough lumber equipment for most of my gear, so they are. The beast would have to collect a lot of propolis to get the cracks filled up. So I give them a little help with that. Taped up all the seams and then taped around the top to make sure that there was no heat escaping anywhere and no upper entrance, just bottom entrance on the hives. And I got to tell you, like it's a pretty pronounced difference in my hives this winter. Again, no losses, and the hives are very, very strong, and that's very encouraging. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to Rick and thank him for that information. You can see here, this was my old setup, and this was taken November 2018, and this after hyper insulating the lids and closing the upper entrance out. This image was taken. You can see they go from hot to very cold. So pretty impressed with that little management strategy change. It's not all about nutrition. There's other management tips and tricks that you need to be aware of for sure. And I chased and I'm still not done. Obviously experimenting with wintering. There's definitely some ways that I can improve that, and I plan to probably make sometime in the near future. I still have quite a bit of work to get caught up on here, but sometime in the near future I'll make a little update video on how I plan to better insulate my box and kind of one and done insulated box setup. And there's a lot of guys right now that are talking about this kind of thing online, and I think the work that Rick and others have done and the information that they posted out online have really generated a lot of discussion around honeybee colony thermal regulation in the winter, and seeing what Rick is able to do out there with colonies in the middle of the prairies in Alberta. I think it's generated a lot of thought in people's mind about better setting up their colonies so their hives can better thermal regulate. And I think whether you're a beekeeper wintering indoors and bringing them out into cold adverse conditions in the spring until the temperatures get more favorable, or you're a guy like me who winters exclusively outdoors on the East Coast with more humidity, I think that there's potential application in what Rick's been up to out there in a number of beekeeping operations. Now, I will say that as far as moisture, build up inside the hives, I do have probably maybe 10% of my colonies. You see some, like in the corners, in the back corners of the hive, you'll see a little bit of mold there, just where there's no I took all the ventilation out except for the bottom ventilation, and tape the seams up so there's no drafts at all in the hive. And about 10% of them do have a little bit of mold in the corners in here. It's a very small patch, but the difference is that I have great big boxes of bees in here. So if I've got a little bit of mold in the corner of those boxes, those bees are going to take care of that. As soon as the weather warms up a little bit, they'll be in there doing their nest maintenance activities as soon as they have some workers to spare, and and get out and fly and clean things out properly. But yeah, these are all nice boxes of bees. I've got a couple down here that went into winter a little bit smaller, super light too. I figured for sure these ones down here would starve out, but they're fine. They're nice. First patty, I went back a week later. These hives had a pound into them, and if they're taking patty the last week of March, that they're it's a healthy brood nest for sure. That's it. That's all I wanted to do, was give a little bit of an update on that. Quite impressed with the results that I've seen. And again, Rick, if you do watch this, thank you for the information. And yeah, everybody stay safe.